Welcome to Ascending with Angels. I'm your host, Robert Turner. Our guest today is an amazing personality, the Reverend Marilyn Redmond. She is presently studying for a doctorate in science of holistic ministries. She is also a renowned author. A book, Roses Have Thorns, which is evolving from pain to joy. She also is a radio talk host with a station in Tacoma, Washington, KLAW.
KLAY.
KLAY. And she also is involved in many other things involving counseling and helping people along their path in life. And she has some amazing stories about angels. Marilyn, would you like to tell us about your stories of angels?
I'd love to, and thank you, Bob, for having me here today. I appreciate that.
You're most welcome. It's a joy to have you.
Well, thank you. I didn't know for a long time about the angels in my life. I lived in a lot of trauma, and there was a lot of crisis going on, and that just wasn't part of my awareness on a conscious level. But unconsciously, I had a clue that there was something going on.
You had this feeling that angels were in your awareness then?
I didn't really know how to put my finger on it in those days because that was a place where my church and the people I associated with didn't really believe in that kind of thing.
Well,
so I just kept my mouth shut.
People never spoke about those things in years past.
Right. So my first experience was I was driving in a trip coming home from a Christmas vacation with my children and my ex-husband, and we went off the edge of the Grand Canyon.
You went off the edge into the Grand Canyon?
Yes. Upside down.
How did you ever survive such a plunge?
Well, the ranger said, well, they actually did send for the aid car, and the ranger showed up in the meantime and said nobody had ever walked out of an accident like we had. We were literally upside down in a station wagon with the two children in the back without a scratch. They were absolutely amazed. They could not understand.
Was this before seat belts?
This was before seat belts. This was back in the 70s. And at that time, I felt the angels. I've had 5 angels in my life, all my life I know today. And they literally took the car in their hands and very slower than slow motion in a movie camera, gradually turned the car, even though we were upside down. They did it very softly and very gently. And I thought, what is going on? And immediately I knew the angels were taking care of us so we would not have a harsh landing and that it would be soft and protected. There was snow, and that helped cushion the fall also.
Now, people may doubt that, but one of the things that I know, having had near-death experiences, is that we are 3-dimensional people, and we do not comprehend the other dimensions. And they are absolutely amazing. And things do happen that we have no comprehension or no way to really test scientifically, but they do transpire. And there's hundreds and thousands of stories similar to this. So I can validate that this does transpire.
And after that experience later in my life, I had a very traumatic time that was going on and had taken Valium because I didn't see any way out of my 30-year battering and abusive marriage. And I felt very hopeless and helpless. And all of a sudden, I couldn't get my hand to my mouth anymore. And I thought, what is going on? And the angels, that's the first time they identified themselves and showed themselves to me. And they said, we are putting silk ropes around your arms so you can't take any more pills. You're to sleep these off and drive home.
Now, you actually saw these angels?
That was the first time I saw them.
Can you describe them?
Well, I have 5 angels. I have 4 that are women, and I know their names today. I didn't always worry about that. And one male angel, which is Eric, has been with me for all this time also. And I just feel very blessed because it was because of them that I'm still alive today, sitting in this chair. Literally, I have had a lot of experiences where I've had other problems with coming close to death, and they have been there for me.
You know, I could validate that because I've had that happen with me and with many other people that I know of, that angels do come and intercede because you have a purpose and a reason for being in this life.
They have a tremendous sense of humor, and I love it. I was taking my first trip after my divorce back to New York, and I was scared to go, you know, on my own, so to speak, and I said, okay, angels, I'm going to need some help, so you're going to come with me. And I got on the plane to go to New York, and I looked up above the luggage racks that there was this gap between the ceiling and the racks, and they're laying out there just like they're in a lounge chair. And I said, what are you doing up there? And they said, well, all the seats are filled. So when the extra people get off, or the people do get off in Portland, then we'll go down and get ourselves a seat. And I said, well, can't you know, they don't see you, can't you just sit down with them? And they said, well, that wouldn't be too polite, so we'll just wait till they get off the plane. And then
They didn't even have tickets.
they were getting a free ride. So I appreciated their being with me on that trip. I went for a poetry award.
You knew that you
At
were
that
safe.
time.
You were going, yeah, you've written quite a bit of poetry in your past.
Right, I have done a lot of poetry writing, and I've also, of course, the book you mentioned has my story about angels in that book. And in poetry form, it has my spiritual journey, and that's what the book's about. And so, yeah, I've had some other experiences where the angels came out when I was painting one night. And do you want to see some of the pictures now?
That would be fabulous.
I was, this is one of the pictures. I have a variety of different styles, and they seem to make themselves known. And this is one that...
Now, do you feel that they're directing your hands as you do this?
Very much so.
That the artwork is really not coming through you. It's
I
coming
sit
from
down
heaven.
and it's like, I did that. And this one night I was painting on a wall hanging. And the wall hanging was very much like this, only it was an angel that particular night. And I came to a spot where I tried blonde hair and I tried brunette hair. And I couldn't. It was like I came to a brick wall. And I thought, now this is very strange. What's going on? And this angel came out, and she had her hand on her hip, and she was standing there very indignant. And she says, haven't you figured it out yet? She says, I have black hair. And no, I had not figured it out. And so I got the black paint, and the picture finished
And
itself.
you saw her right in front of you.
Yes, I do see angels very clearly, very often, for various reasons. In my counseling, they come and give me aid, and I do readings, psychic readings, tarot, and various things, and they come and give me help with those
You
various.
feel that this information comes to you from outside you.
Yes.
through you.
Well, it's a knowing inside.
You're the catalyst of it.
And I see them in my, I guess you'd say, imagination. Somebody would probably say it is your imagination, but they're very real to me, very, very clearly and distinct, sometimes more than others. But I do have that connection where when I had a car accident recently, and all of a sudden I was going in this direction which I hadn't pre-planned. I was heading for the junior college to leave some handouts to be printed, and changed my mind when I-5 looked very, very full, and decided I'd go a back route. And all of a sudden I'm in this car accident, and Jennifer came out, was one of my angels, and stopped the car, put her hand on the car so I didn't go any further. And I drove over and took care of the accident problems with the other fellow. And the next day I'm meditating, and I said, why did this happen? And she said, well, you didn't have to total your car. All you had to do was go take care of the situation to clear the karma. and you did that. She said, you took responsibility for it, and your karma from the past situation was cleared. And now that's not an issue in your life anymore.
Wow, that's interesting. That's an
Yeah.
unusual twist.
Yes.
Now, when you hear them, how does that come to you? Do you hear them vocally, like me talking to you, or does it appear in your mind as pictures? How does this transpire?
Well, both. One of the times that was very vivid, I was having a gallbladder attack on the Nile. I'd gone to Egypt to go to meditate in the Great Pyramid, and I was touring the country there through the various spiritual sites. And while going up the Nile, all of a sudden I became very, very sick. I thought it was the food and the water, and I never ever thought of it being a gallbladder attack, but there was great pain. And I'm still on the boat while everybody else is going doing their touristy thing.
Right.
And I was very much out of it. And all of a sudden I opened my eyes, and all 5 of them were at the foot of the bed. And I said, what are you doing here? And they said, well, we came to keep you company because when you were sick as a child, you were always abandoned when you were ill, and we didn't want you to feel abandoned because you're sick and everybody else is off the boat. So they stayed with me, and the pain literally subsided while they were there and amused me, and we told stories, and they kept me in a happy state of mind, and then I went back into the pain later, of course.
Were you alone at this time?
I was alone on the
There was
boat.
nobody else in the room when they were there?
Not at that time, no. No, they seem to appear to me when I am on my own.
Have they ever appeared to you physically in another form that you didn't recognize so you wouldn't be scared?
That happened. I had a flat tire. I was driving to Boise to visit my grandchildren, who I dearly love. They're coming shortly to see me. And I've always been scared to death of a flat tire on a freeway. And due to needing to chain up at Snoqualmie Pass, the chain had, for whatever reason, these were not typical chains, and it had made a cut in the tire. And by the time I was about a half an hour going into Pendleton, the tire was so flat you really couldn't drive on it. And I had no choice but to stop. And I had always heard these stories about people on the sides of freeways, you know, having difficulty with problems of people not being too polite to them, causing difficulties, and I was scared. And all of a sudden, when I stopped the car, I went into this total peace, which I cannot explain. I got out of the car, and there was a gentleman, an older gentleman your age, driving by in a small little pickup, stopped and asked if he could help me, and took me in his truck to the local tire dealer, and they came back out, got the car, changed the tire, and as I went to thank him for his help, he was gone.
Just disappeared, car and everything.
Yeah, he was gone. And it didn't dawn on me right away because I was still in the turmoil of was I going to get over the Blue Mountains before dark in the ice and snow to be safe. And the tire people took me ahead of other people that had been there waiting. Said, don't tell anybody, we're taking you ahead so you can get across the mountains before dark, where it'll be safe. And of course, in all that turmoil and everything, I was caught up in that and didn't realize until the next day that, yes, that was my angel.
Did that surprise you when your angel disappeared?
It scared me because I wanted to thank him, and it had not crossed my mind that he would become a person that would be that helpful to me in a case that was so practical.
Yeah, and I can validate that, and that's happened to me, and it's happened to other people that I've interviewed, where they've been helped and they just vanish. Car, everything just vanishes in an instant.
And it really surprised me because it was all of a sudden he was gone. And they did an interesting thing for me. I was going through a check stand at the grocery store, and all of a sudden this tabloid was in my basket. And at that point I wasn't reading tabloids. I had given them up. But I had in the past, and I thought, I don't want this, and I put it back. And then in this case, they just spoke to me and said, you're going to take this magazine home. And I said, no, I don't want it. I don't want to even read it. So they said, just go ahead and take it home. So I put it back in the basket. It wasn't something I'd planned on. And I took it home, and I went to throw it out. I wasn't even going to open it. And Jennifer said, she's one of my more prominent angels, and she said, well, at least look through it. So I looked through the magazine, and they were requesting angel stories. And I thought, well, my angel stories aren't any better than anybody else's. In this whole United States, there's lots of people with angel stories. Who would want mine? And so I just didn't do anything with it for several days. And then I woke up one morning and said, well, maybe I will respond. I sent the poetry about my angels that's from my book, and I thought, I'll send some pictures of my angels along. I had some snapshots. And I didn't hear anything more. And a month before Christmas, the National Examiner called me and said, we'd like to do an interview and make you our Christmas spread about angels and have your stories. So they took the story from the Grand Canyon and the story from being on the Nile, wrote a beautiful article. They talked to me 5 times to get the whole article accurate, and talked about my other art of being available and so forth. And then they took the photographs and blew them up, actually bigger than what I sent, and blew up the picture larger than I sent. I couldn't believe when it came out. What a nice job. But it was strictly because it was not my doing. I'm sure the angels had a lot more to do with this than I ever dreamed of.
Wonderful artwork.
And so it was very nice to get that national recognition too. But I've also painted animals and portraits of people, and this is a dog I did, and that was the first pastel I did before I realized how wonderful.
Is that Candy? That was your
Candy
dog?
is the dog. My friend's dog's name was Candy, and I'd been painting angels in watercolors up until then. And my art teacher twisted my arm to get me to this class, and she said, you're going to learn pastels, and now I do most of my angels in pastels.
Yeah, it's beautiful work.
And I love doing animals, and I love doing portraits too. And I also paint on sweatshirts, t-shirts, and tote bags, and they're available.
Is that a picture of one of your angels?
Well, I happen to be able to tune into other people's angels too.
Oh.
And as I'm painting, all of a sudden I'll recognize the face and I'll say, oh, that's so, and it's not, again, it's not what I've planned. It just kind of happens. No, this is not one of my angels. But I do paint other people's angels for them, and have done that for quite a while now. But I enjoy it.
You're a person of a lot of talents.
Oh, thank you. And they do help me a lot with my counseling. And one of the things I like to do is spiritual counseling, because so many people don't recognize that domestic violence is a very spiritual problem. And I literally had to find my soul and resurrect my soul, because it was very much inoperable. And in getting in touch with that kind of information, my angels have been so helpful, and that's where I went into counseling, was to help others learn that they can come out of these kinds of trauma, kinds of situations that we want personal growth or we want spiritual growth. We don't really know what our needs are, and my opinion is, I've had a lot of counseling, but a lot of it tends to be superficial, but very helpful in that particular area, but to go deeper into what's the cause rather than just the Band-Aid.
Now, do you think the average person can tap into their angel to come out of this cocoon that they're in, to really be what they're supposed to be in this life?
I believe anybody can if you're open to it. I didn't, it just kind of came to me in various ways, and I didn't understand it at first, but as I became more and more open to my angels, I discovered past lives. I've discovered I can help others with past life regression. I'm internationally board certified for that. I also do hypnotherapy and helping people with their problems, but I also found out that I can talk to people passed over. And if you want an interesting story about a recent
I'd like to hear one of those.
A recent situation, and I have a lot of fun talking about Henry.
Right.
Henry lived at Tokeland Hotel, and I was down there for the weekend. Now, the Tokeland Hotel is the oldest hotel in Washington State on the coast, and it's very much the Victorian type of atmosphere. It's a quaint place. Are we running out of time?
Yeah.
And we had been checked into a room that was supposed to be haunted, and in the newspapers and on television, it's quite known that this is a haunted hotel. And that night we were supposed to be in the haunted room, and nothing happened. And I thought, oh, now this is very strange, because I was kind of looking forward to what was going to happen. And so, because it's an older place, you had to walk down the hallway to the restrooms. And Henry's standing out there.
In the hallway?
In the hallway. And I said, well, how come nothing happened last night? And he said, well, I moved out because I knew you were coming.
Now, you could see him just as though he was in physical form?
He was not, yeah, I could see his physical form. He was not as vivid as some forms I've seen. I've seen other people passed over more vivid than Henry, but Henry was definitely there. And so I started conversations with Henry every time I'd go up and down the hall. And we got to know each other, and he was a very friendly soul. And I knew there were ghosts in the kitchen, and I didn't really get involved with those. But as I went home that weekend, that evening was a Sunday night, the next day I went to a meeting, and lo and behold, this lady at the meeting I'd never seen before was from Tokeland. And she mentioned that's where she was visiting from. And I said, oh, I was just there. And she said, yeah, I live next door to the hotel, and my son works in the hotel kitchen, and I go over and visit a lot. And when I came home from visiting with this lady who happened to be attending the same meeting, which I don't know how Henry knew that this was going to happen, I opened up the front door and I said, what's going on? And Henry said, I attached myself to her so I could come see you.
And now he's in your home?
He's in my home. He stayed for 3 days. We had a good time. Everybody will probably think I'm really crazy. But yeah, we had a good time. He came because it was right after 9/11. And he had been called to go help. And he needed help to get over to the source, to the light, and he'd come for me to help get him there. And he said, I know you can do it. I says, well, yeah, I can. I didn't know, you know, it really was a surprise to me. So after visiting for a couple of days, my friend called one day. He says, is Henry still there? And I said, yeah, but we're going to get him on his way. And so Henry did go and helped do some, usually eternity is very organized, goes very smoothly, worked out. But with 9/11, they really did need extra hands. And his relatives and friends had beckoned him to come and help out and to get things in more in order.
What era was Henry living as a person?
Oh, good. I never really got into that.
Was it in the last century?
Yes, he was in the early 1900s, and part of being there at the hotel when it was first there. That was a place where he had been. And so we got him over to the other side. He later came back and thanked me.
He came back to you in your house?
Yes, and I've even had people come for counseling that say, well, who's this angel standing next to me?
And they can see that.
This particular fellow said he could see his mother's angels, and so he was curious about my angels. So I've had other people that have come to the house also feel the atmosphere, even if they didn't see the angels, they walk in and say, oh, this feels so good.
Yeah.
And the amazing thing, Bob, is that this is the house where the battering and abuse went on for 30 years. It did not feel like that all the time. But now the angels live there with me.
There's a whole different feeling. Yeah.
Totally different feeling.
Do you feel comfortable being there?
Totally safe today. And there was a time when I didn't even want to go back home because I knew from some of the experiences of going against my ex-husband's wishes what the penalty would be and broken tailbones, etc. I didn't, there was a time when it was not that comfortable feeling.
Now, where's Henry today?
Oh, Henry stayed on the other side.
He stayed on the other
Yeah.
side, so he's crossed over.
Right. And the first person to come to me was my aunt. I had been very concerned about, because she committed suicide, and religious philosophy doesn't always think that's the best thing to do, and it's not. But I loved her, and she was really the only real love in my life. My mother was mentally ill and couldn't really do the motherly nurturing thing. And so I was very close to my aunt, and she came back to me because she knew how concerned I was about what had happened to her. And I was taken to her by my uncle, because so often when people come back from having passed over, they're usually in their 30s. And he knew that I wouldn't recognize her because she was older when she left us. And as soon as I saw her, I knew I wouldn't have recognized her, but emotionally my soul connected immediately. And I was so grateful that she was in good hands and doing well. And then my mother started coming to me, and my father, and they came together at one point. And I love helping people do this. I have had some experiences where it's, one fellow was a retired minister, wanted to get in touch with a friend that died. And in the process of, I saw his friend very clearly. I was taking a class on regression and for past lives, and his friend was there with him in the class. And so we talked with him. And then I said, aren't you sure that you want to talk to your father? And he was real hesitant about that. And so he said no. He kind of backed off from that situation. And his father came out, dressed in black with a black blanket over his head, said, I do not want to talk to my son. And I'd never had that experience.
Yeah, that's unusual.
Well, it caught me by surprise. And it wasn't me talking. I don't know what happened. God just kind of took over. And they started communicating through me. And the next thing I know, the blanket was coming off. And the son, who was in his 70s, started crying. And they had come into harmony, understanding that there was a misunderstanding had kept them apart, and this healing was occurring in the universe. It was the most beautiful, touching experience of my life.
Absolutely amazing. Now, did you receive any personal messages from your parents?
Yes, I did. Because of the trauma in my growing up, the abusive childhood I went through, they came back and apologized. And I was very, very relieved. It was like for the first time it was acknowledged and validated that it wasn't just my imagination. I'd gone through these experiences. And that's why I like having my radio show. I like getting the messages out to people. My show is in Tacoma, as you mentioned, every Wednesday at noon. And I really appreciate people hearing that there's answers to some of these things that
you're
sometimes...
opening the door and telling people that they're not alone, because a lot of people feel totally alone and don't know where to turn. And there are other people that have these experiences like yourself. And I commend you for doing that.
Well, I have done a lot of writing of articles, and I'm finishing a self-help book right now. And I hope to get that out and find a publisher soon for it, because it's really a way that anybody can heal and while doing prayer and meditation and healing yourself, you get in touch with your angels, I think, if you're open. You get in touch with people that have passed over, if that's your desire. I think the possibilities are all there, and the more spiritual we become, I think it's just easier to access.
Yeah, we don't have the knowledge overall to tune into this, though it's there. You have to be aware that it is there and accept it. And a lot of people don't accept it. You know, they think it's foolish, but it does transpire.
Well, that's why I like teaching so well. I teach a lot of classes, and the more we transform our lives from the fears and the guilts and the angers and the behaviors that are inappropriate, it opens us up to more spirituality and the faith and the trust about it, and that we can trust it implicitly.
Yeah, it's amazing. We still are a very young society here on this earth, and in cosmic time it's probably a flash. So we have a long way to go and a lot of understanding, which we need today. So your talk radio show must be very helpful to people in your area.
Well, the audience is growing fast, and I'm very pleased about the feedback I get. And the people that have been on my show, one fellow, this is his words, not mine, said I was heads and shoulders above any radio show he had appeared on in the United States, and was very gracious.
That's a kudu.
I was very pleased.
Yeah, you should be.
Yes.
Yeah, because you are helping a lot of people. And Marilyn, I wanted to thank you for coming on the show. I appreciate your stories. And those people that are listening, if they will just consider everything is a possibility and evaluate it in your own consciousness, in your own time, because it is there and they can tap into it. And there's thousands of people that can be touched by this if they would just stop and listen, because there's more to this life than we realize. And we go about too materialistic in our way, on the wrong path.
I agree.
But soon the door will open, like people like you spreading the word.
Well, fear is an illusion, I found out, and I love to help people sort through the mass and illusions to get to the reality.
Fear can be a big challenge. Yeah, and it's a threshold of an opportunity.
And it also helps in your health. And I want you to have this book and keep that.